Mark Gonyea is extremely passionate about graphic design and how the combination of basic shapes can tell a compelling story. I had a great time sitting down and talking with Mark, an accomplished graphic designer and children's book author. For those who love design in children's books and how to make one, this is an interview you can't miss. So welcome everybody. This is episode 2 of Storycomic Presents, and I have with me in the studio, with a virtual studio here, Mark Gonyea. I said your last name right, correct? Gonyea.
Yes.
All right. Okay. You haven't you never corrected me before, so I just assumed I was saying it right.
Were you saying it wrong before? I don't even pay attention. I
And so Mark is hails from. You live in Vermont now, correct?
I live in Vermont.
Right.
Yes.
And were you from Vermont originally?
I grew up right across the lake in Plattsburgh.
Okay.
So
all right.
I didn't go very far, but
just
always in the Northeast.
Oh, always in the same general geographic.
I'm
area.
the last Northeast holdout too. All the relatives and family have gone south.
Oh, okay. All right. to warmer pastures.
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah.
And I know that you are also a part of we have a Vermont comic creators group as well.
Yep. We've got a meeting coming up this Sunday, I think.
I think so. Yeah. And somewhere in the Burlington area. So, and I know, so that's how I met Mark. I met you through that group. And I know when I first went to, it was to the 2016 Vermont Comic Book Convention, and they had just a table of just people's, little giveaway swag and stuff,
right,
with like little business cards and stuff. And I remember my eyes drew straight to your style artwork, and we'll show some images for people who are watching this, and what we'll link to some of the images on when people who listen to this later. There, it was your cryptozoology.
Okay.
Yeah, ABCs of the cryptozoology thing, and your style itself is nice. Fantastic. It's unique and nostalgic at the same time, if that makes any sense.
It's very. I feel like the term minimalistic has been overused a lot, but it is. I really like. I try to pare everything down into the least amount of information that I need in order to convey whatever concept I'm trying to do. And that's more. Well, more. I think it looks. I like that aesthetic, but also it's faster.
And so for our viewers at home, I'm just going to share. This is the image that you sent to me. It's for me to.
Yeah.
You do. Yeah. So this was. That was
a Kickstarter. This was called Minimal Trek.
Okay.
So this is every episode of the original Star Trek series, and each episode is a design in the poster.
Okay.
In sequence of air date was how I did it.
So if anybody's ever interested, go ahead and check it out on markgonyea.com.
Yep.
And tons and tons of stuff. You've been doing this. So before we start talking more about your work, let's just dive right in and kind of give everybody the history, how you started into doing graphic design and children's books.
Well, I mean, I've always drawn. My parents have this story of getting contacted by my kindergarten school teacher because what I was doing was copying cartoons out of the Sunday paper, bringing them into class and selling them to the other kids. So they had to tell my parents, like, yeah, you can't be selling stuff in school. So that was my first, 6 years old. And I was like, this is a good gig. Then, you go through high school and college, and I took some typical art classes like painting and printmaking and all kinds of other things and illustration. And then I decided that I really wanted to zero in on comics. So I applied to the Joe Kubert School in New Jersey. And that was, at the time, that was the only comic book school that you could go to. I know Vermont actually has their own now, the School of Cartooning. What is it called?
Center for Cartoon
Center for,
Studies.
yeah.
Yep.
And so I graduated from the Cooper School in '95. My very first job out of college was a graphic artist for Heavy Metal magazine, which was kind of like right in Manhattan, which was like a dream come true, you know.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Totally in over my head, like way in over my head. So that lasted about 8 months. And I was like, okay, I'm up to speed. But now, you know, then the offices were moving and I didn't want to move out to Long Island. So then I came back to the Northeast, settled in Vermont, started being a graphic artist for Vermont Teddy Bear. And then I was there for 6 years. One of the things that about being a graphic artist in a larger company like that is you end up at a lot of meetings with marketers and copywriters and a lot of people that may not have a background in graphic design. So you'll have questions like, well, why is that blue? Or why is that font so much larger than this other font? Or why is there so much space around this other thing? And I feel like I got really good at explaining design very basically in a simple way for easy to understand. So I started putting all of those little tidbits together, and that ended up being my first kids book, which was a book about design. Complicated doesn't make it good, which has always been my operating motto for design is simpler is better. Complicated doesn't make it good. And that's when I left 2005. I left Vermont Teddy Bear to just do kids books and graphic design, and even doing kids books was a bit of a not a mistake, but that wasn't what I had planned to do. I had done the design book as just a design book. I was sending it to traditional publishers, but not kids publishers. And they were sending me back feedback like, we like it, but we don't do kids books. So then I was like, oh, okay. And then they would say things like, well, we also don't work with people that don't have an agent. I'm like, okay. So I went out and sent it to a few agents, and one company was kind enough to take it on. And the rest, as they say, is history. 8 books later.
So tell me a little bit about your. We talked earlier about your style. What would you say is where'd you get your inspiration from? Of what did you, when you said you were young and you were drawing, and which was there a specific artist or like comic strip or
Yep.
or something that you kind of were drawn towards and that kind of helped influence your style?
I specifically took this book out. There was and I knew the cartoon before I knew this book. There was a cartoon called The Dot and the Line. And it's this great cartoon where it's just a relationship between a straight line and a little round red ball. And it's basically all about design. It's all about structure and line and size and proportion and, you know, curved lines versus straight lines. And it's been since I saw it when I probably came out, you know, when I was 5. It's just been such a great basis for what I like. And it's very, very simplistic. It's really like there's very little background. It's just these 2 characters in frame. So that's always really appealed to me. Shel Silverstein has always really appealed to me. His style is basically line art, you know, as simple as you can get. Saul Bass is probably my favorite graphic artist. And he only ever did one kid's book. He did a book, brought that out too, is Henri Walks to Paris.
Oh, right.
And it's really cool because his whole his whole deal is just that kind of super minimalist kind of hand done, bold, big areas of color, and so he's always been an inspiration too.
Wow. Yeah, you can definitely see that with your
Yeah.
style of how that's
Well, and I
connected.
used to do, like when I was a kid, I would do cut paper art.
Okay.
And so when Illustrator came out, that was like right in my wheelhouse. I was like, oh yeah, I already understand how to use this program.
So
So I
what's
dove right into that.
okay? Yeah, well, you just brought up Illustrator. What's your mode of design? You say, is it Photoshop? It's Illustrator. Is it all digital? Do you do anything by hand anymore?
It's, boy, I got to say it's almost 95% digital now. Like it's really high percentage digital, and it's been that way for a good 10 years. Um, I do a lot of thumbnailing by hand, but once I get to the point where I really want to start formatting pages, it's almost all digital. Yeah. But I'll sit there and thumbnail and brainstorm and if I'm sitting in front of the TV as a distraction or something.
Right. So
But
you're one of the few people that I know there actually is that this is like your full-time, you are
yep,
full-time
yep,
graphic designer, children's book author. So what's your schedule like? And like, how do you break up the day? What's your,
right.
how do you like, quote unquote, go to the office in that sense?
Right, right. Well, I have a studio. This isn't the studio. This is the living room, but I do have a studio that holds all of my, and I do a lot of stuff. Like I have the Etsy shop, and I do the freelance design. I do the kids books. I do posters. I do craft shows and Comic Cons and things like that. So I have a studio that holds all of that stuff. So I'm a night owl, so I don't go to bed till 2 or 3, and that could be, and I could be working right up until then. So I probably don't start work until after 12 o'clock noon.
Hmm.
I'll have lunch or breakfast, and then I'll start working because I probably don't get up till 10, I didn't go to bed till 2. Uh, but I'll do, I'll get up in the morning, kind of get the day started. Then I start working about noon or 1, and I'll work. I'm a big believer, and I haven't always been, but now I'm a big believer in lists. Like I have a list of everything that I want to accomplish that day and projects, and I almost never complete the whole list, but it's a great feeling when you can cross something off that. So I'll spend anywhere from 3 to 4 hours doing whatever projects I need to do. If it's a paying project, then that always takes precedent. But I also have a lot of personal projects that I know maybe I'll do a Kickstarter later, or some ideas for a book that nobody's really asking about yet, but I still want to flesh out a little bit and send to an agent or something like that. So I'll do that till about 4. And then at 4 o'clock, I go do errands. Go to the post office, go get food, go all that stuff, and then usually about 7 or 8, I'll start working again, and then at that point, 8 o'clock or so, I'll work till 1 or 2, if I have stuff to do. Sometimes I've gotten really good at riding the up and down of creativity.
Hmm.
Like I can tell when it's not happening. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna zone out in front of Netflix for today and pick it up again tomorrow, because tomorrow will be different.
And because you said you also have, you have your website. So in those days when those times when you're not very creative, is that when you kind of update your Etsy shop and
Right. Yeah.
do some
Yeah.
of the
You'll update
digital
that,
stuff?
update your shop, update your website. Um, the low, I find the low motivational days are actually really good days to go back to projects that maybe you've set aside like 6 months ago. And this winter that's almost what I've focused on this winter, is going back to projects that I've set aside. And I've already completed 2 posters that I just almost had given up on, and 2 story kids books that not that I had given up on, but I had just said, okay, it got to a certain point where you just kind of have to go, I'm out of ideas on this one.
Right.
And you put it away, and your subconscious keeps thinking on it. And you go back, and I just finished up a poster yesterday that I had set aside with probably a third yet to finish. And you go back to it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't even remember why I set this aside, because I know exactly what I need to do to finish it.
And so what do you use? So you said you use Adobe Illustrator.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use one of those Cintiqs, or do you use a mouse, or how do you?
I use the trackpad.
Really?
Like, I'm literally like click, 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 click. Like, I don't use a mouse. I don't use a pen brush or anything like that. And it's just because it's what I've used for the last, 15 years. Because I've had a laptop for that long. I'm just really quick with it. and literally, like, people will sometimes I'll get together with a few other artists, and we'll have a get together to work and bounce ideas off of, and they'll have the same reaction. They'll be like, what are you doing? Like, no, they have a lot easier ways to do that. I'm like, I like it.
Right. So one point too is that we talk about here on Storycomic. We always like to say that everybody has a story to share. Everybody can tell a story. And I know on your website you mentioned that you specialize in the art of silent storytelling.
Yeah.
How do you define that? What do you mean? How would you define
that? Is
that definition?
For me, that's just wordless narratives. So it's so I'll do when I do story posters, which I consider silent narratives, where it's almost long form comic strip, where you'll take anywhere from 48 to 108 panels, and you're almost storyboarding it instead of writing it out. So you're just taking the action and the sequence, and a little bit at a time, working out the story. And it's really interesting because I'm basically writing at the same time that I'm doing the artwork. So if I have like the first third of a story done, and I know sort of where it's going, but I see that there's a lot of yellow and blue in one part of the story. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm going to want to balance that out later on in the story as it gets lower on the page. And then it starts to inform where the story has to go, because I know I'm going to want blue. So what do I have to do to have blue in the story later? And so as much as the story influences the art influences the story on those particular projects.
And you also talked about that. You also talked about that you had a publisher, mm-hmm. But you also self-publish. So I know a lot of people who are listening on this. Well, I mean, some people who are watching or listening saying, "Wow, he's got a publisher. That's amazing. I'm always looking for a publisher."
Yeah.
And then we also are starting to see these very fervent folks who swear by self-publishing, because it's basically like going into business for yourself. So first of all, how did you get a publisher? That would be question number one. And then question number two will be, how do you decide what books you will self-publish and which books will you give to a publisher?
Right. The publisher thing, I somewhat, I don't want to say I lucked into, but I had done the first design book completely. Like, it was 120 something pages done. I think it ended up being 140 something, but my first draft was 120. And it was a complete thought. So that's what I was sending to publishers as my unagented author and artist. And they were coming back with, well, and this was before I had my first contract. Let's say this was like 2003, 2002, 2003. So Facebook didn't exist, Twitter didn't exist, Instagram didn't exist, LinkedIn didn't exist. All of these networking sites weren't around. So I was physically mailing samples of everything to publishers. And they would come back and say, well, you should go get an agent. So I literally only sent 3 copies to 3 different agents. And the first 2 said no. And then the third one said, yeah, we'll give it a shot. And that's really, really, really lucky. Like that doesn't generally happen.
So do the books that have a publisher, can our listeners and viewers go to your website at markgonyea.com and actually get those, or is your entire library available through click through or seeing them on Amazon, or how does that work?
Right now, anything that I do that's published through a let's call it a mainstream publisher, is available on Amazon or barnesandnoble.com or any of the major outlets online. Some of those probably, since I've been doing it since 2005, all but probably the last few books are out of print, which doesn't mean they're unavailable. It just means you might have to buy a used one. The latest book I did, which was One Little Monster, that just came out a year ago this past fall, so it's been out a little over a year. That's definitely still in print and still available, so that's on there.
We have that book.
Yeah.
I think about when we first got a copy from you, I think my little girl wanted me to read at least once a week.
Yeah. So. That's great. Well, and all my friends have kids, and they've all grown up on my books. Like I have like a little group of adolescent graphic artists. They all know the lingo, you know. So,
and so the other question was when you have an idea or something, how
do I decide what's what?
Right.
Well, because I have the agent, it is contracted that she represents whatever I do for kids' books.
Okay.
So, but that's also all she represents. That company represents. So anything that's a coloring book or posters or postcards or anything that's not a book, I generally self-publish. I'm in the process right now of looking for an art agent also who would represent that kind of work for me.
Okay. So you're still pretty good with the idea of wanting to get an agent then?
Well, if at my right now, yes. If I was starting out, if I was 20 right now and just starting out and starting over, it would be really hard for me to say the way to go is to go get an agent.
Okay.
It's a lot of work to do it on your own.
Right.
It's a huge amount of work. Like I've cut back a lot on the number of conventions and things that I go to lately. But I was doing 10 to 14, shows a year, and traveling all over the country to do them.
Right.
So it's a lot, and there's a lot more because Twitter exists and Facebook exists and all of these other avenues exist. I don't want to say it's easier to get your name out there or to get a following, but it is, I'm going to say easier because I don't have a better word for it, right. But there are more opportunities to find that following and to find that group of people that like what you do. But I just turned 50, so I want somebody else to do it. Well, just bring me the work. All I want to do is the creative stuff.
Right.
I don't want to do the tracking people down to get jobs and all that stuff.
And it's true as artists, as children's book artists and graphic designers and illustrators and comic book artists and self-publishers, is that you really it's a new world out there.
Yeah.
Where you really have to be your own promoter.
Very much so. And even when I was starting, even though I have an agent and publishers and things like that, it's still a lot up to me. When a new book comes out, unless it attracts some awards or attracts some really, really positive reviews, it's a lot of the promotion is still left up to the artist and author.
And so we talked before we talked a couple of days ago about things and you also have a friend that you work with on a comic book series as well. And
my friend Sam Gurditch, who is also on Facebook, and the company that we do together is called Strong Arm Labs, and we've done 5 or 6 comics through there. And we've since we started doing the comics, we've also started to do posters, and the posters are on my website. The comics will be on strongarmlabs.com is the website for both of us. And it's really interesting because the reason I'm an artist and author is I like to do both of that. He's the only, very rarely do I work with another writer, and try to do their vision of something, because I have such a clear idea of what I want. Sometimes it's hard to set that aside to do what somebody else is thinking. But Sam and I work really well together. We've known each other for 30 years. So we met in college, and we have a very similar, I don't want to say similar sense of storytelling, but similar interests. We're both, very much into sci-fi and fantasy and space and all that stuff.
So talk to me a little bit about the process the difference in processes between doing a children's book and doing a comic book.
Right.
So, because in some sources it's all about telling a story, but also it's not necessarily like the audience does matter, but kids can read a comic book and adults can read children's books.
Right.
So maybe from the design and implementation perspective, or even from the creator, what would make you decide to say this would make a better children's book than a comic book, I guess?
Right. I think for me, it's almost the length of story. And a lot of my earlier kids' books were, the nonfiction ones are 140 pages plus.
Wow. A
lot of my storybook kids' books, generally those are 32 or less pages. So you actually, and you're 32 pages, and you're probably only putting one picture, one illustration on a page or even a spread. So there's a lot less, I feel like there's a lot less space in a children's book, not for storytelling, because you can still get a lot of storytelling in there, but you're just trying to fill the space more with larger illustrations. And I feel like in a comic, you can get a lot more complicated in the storytelling for sure. And you can probably get more detailed with the illustration. And it's interesting that, like in the children's book, you're seeing probably, a page of text or a half page of text and then a illustration. And in a comic, and specifically the story posters that I kind of view as a poster all on one page, you're seeing a progression that you don't normally get in a kid's book. So you're seeing like the panel, and you're literally kind of visualizing a character jumping from one place to the other, or punching somebody, or flying through something. And I think that really gives comics their own unique way of telling a story, which I really love.
And also too is, I got comics all over the place here.
Yeah.
I rarely, unless I really like the storyline, unless it's a graphic novel, I rarely will pick up and read a comic book more than 3 times. But the children's book, you could very well read that children's book 100 times.
Right.
In a month.
So, yeah.
So is that something that you think about from that design perspective or that story perspective, is that it's going to be reread a lot? And when you're, as a parent, and my kids got a whole big a bookshelf full of children's books. It's wanting them to pick your
Right,
book
right.
over and over again. So when it comes to that, how much of the psychology is it behind color,
Right.
page placement? How much of that actually goes into the process as you make a children's book?
For me, I mean, for some people, probably a lot, but for me, I'm writing the books that I wanted when I was a kid. Like, I write the stories and I illustrate the stories that I find interesting. I've always said that I'm not really doing kids books, even though they're getting published by children's book publishers. I'm trying to do books that if I saw on the shelf in a bookstore, I would stop and pick up, and I would buy and read and keep on a shelf. And I think that comes back around to my basic style, which is somewhat more sharp and minimalistic and artistic. Not that kids' books aren't artistic. There's amazing artists in kids' books, and way better artists than I am. But something about the more minimal color and the more minimal shapes attracts my attention as a fan. You know.
Do you have any feedback on what level of children, like what age is there a pretty good,
I would say for
sweet spot?
Yeah, like the earlier books I've done, like the nonfiction design books, I would say probably like 6 to 12. And then the newer books I've done, which are more story books, the One Little Monster, the Spooky Box, those probably skew a little bit younger. So I would say like 4 to 8, depending on how much of a reader the kid is. And I don't really it's part of my minimalist and complicated doesn't make a good philosophy, is that I don't put a lot of text even if it's only one illustration per page with some text, my text is still probably fairly minimal.
Right.
So my agent likes to say that my books are good for kids that don't like to read. I'm like, all right, I'll take it. Yeah.
Well,
that's fine by me.
What you said earlier is that you always wanted to make you like making children's books that you would have liked to read as a kid.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, like Chuck Jones. I remember there's an interview with Chuck Jones gave, is saying, why is the Looney Tunes so good? He's like, well, I don't make them for other people. I make them for me.
Yeah.
I make the cartoons of what I would like to watch. So
this is what I would buy. So
yeah. And so, through that, I wanted to touch on you as touch a bit and talk to you about your posters. So right now you actually have a Kickstarter that's live that is, as of this recording, it's
very close.
You got 15 days to go on this. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just share the screen for the folks that are watching at home, and for them to see what we're looking at here. So for those that don't know, so Kickstarter is basically, it's a crowdsourcing, what would you call it, Mark?
Crowdsourcing startup kind of
project startup.
Financing site. Yeah.
Right. And so you've been, this is, how many things have you done so far? So you've done 24. 24.
Yeah.
And so this one, what I find extremely interesting about this is that this touches on your two passions, really. It's the graphic design piece and the children's book piece. So what you've done is you've taken fairly factual fairy tales.
Yeah.
So this is do you want to talk to us about this? It's posters, sure. 5 posters, is it?
Yep. It's 5 posters. And the idea was, obviously I'm a big fan of fantasy and fiction. And actually I love Aesop's fables and fairy tales. But I didn't want to do just a basic retelling of those stories. They've been told a lot, like people know the stories. But I wanted to do some artwork that spoke to the general concepts behind the stories. So in Little Red Riding Hood, so these posters are just presenting facts about what happens in fairy tales. So Little Red Riding Hood, there are facts about wolves, There's facts about the color red. There's facts about like what's the animal with the largest eyeball, what's the animal with the largest teeth. Beauty and the Beast, you get into mob mentality facts and facts about love and beauty and the Beauty and the Beast. I threw in a few facts about Stockholm syndrome because that's that's kind of a recurring meme that comes up with that one quite a bit. Goldilocks and the Three Bears. There are facts about breaking and entering, how many people get lost in the woods every year. So it's just these oddball facts that all pertain to the ideas behind these fairy tales.
So could you see these being, and with the age range on this, would you see this like young adult? Because there might be some more of more different, more complex themes that they touch on.
I would say definitely probably 10, 12 and above, somewhere around there.
Okay. And so this isn't the first time you've done these types, right? Didn't you?
The infographic kind of thing?
The infographic stuff, yeah.
I've done, this is the first time I think I've tried to create a theme around it. I've done a lot of infographics as a freelance graphic artist. And there's a lot of, with the story posters, I do a lot of iconic poster work where it's maybe all movie titles illustrated in a very minimalist way. Or I have one poster that's all phobias, and it's just a little icon to represent that particular phobia kind of a thing. These are interesting in that they're a little more freeform design-wise than a lot of the other stuff. I do a lot of stuff that I kind of grid out, like I do a lot of boxes and squares, and these are definitely much more letting the amount of space I need fill the facts, or the facts fill the space that they need to fill, kind of a thing. There's a lot more. These feel more illustrative than a lot of the other posters.
Okay. So talk us through some of the pledges on this. What do people get for what they?
Yeah, this one is fairly straightforward. It's for $20. You can get any one poster, and then for I think $35, you can get any two posters. And then I think I jump up, $45 for 3, and then $60 for all 5. Okay. And with any of those pledges, you also get the high-res PDF to go with that of whatever it is that you choose to get. So if you get one poster for $20, you're getting, say, the Little Red Riding Hood poster. That gets put into a tube and mailed to you. But then you also get the high-res PDF, so that if something happens to the poster, it gets wet or it gets ripped or any of that stuff, you have this high-res digital file. You can go down to FedEx and print off your own for personal use copy. So that you kind of always have. It's kind of like when you have an audio, you get the audiobook version of a book you buy, kind of a thing, so that you always have it.
Right. So that's actually a really good deal. If somebody went for the 60, you'd get 5 posters, which means you're paying about $12 per poster.
Yeah. Yep. And they're really good quality. They're like 90-pound paperweight, right. Which is, I'm trying to think, it's almost like a wallpaper weight paper. It's a really nice.
I like that picture.
My big head poking up behind me.
Those are huge posters.
Yeah, they're 18 by 24. So, and then I try to do all my posters I do in standard framing sizes, so that you don't have to custom frame them or anything like that. You can go down to Michael's or AC Moore and grab a frame.
So how have you been doing with that with Kickstarter?
Overall, I've done really well. I mean, the first project I ever did way back in like 2010, your eyes are always bigger than your stomach. So that one, I learned a lot from that one, and that one wasn't successful. But then I had like probably 10 in a row that were successful. And it's been a great, because I can honestly say that none of these posters would get made without Kickstarter. Like
Really?
I wouldn't order. Generally, from where I get posters, you have to order a certain amount. So I'm not going to order 200 or 100 of each poster, of 5 different posters, just to have on hand to sell 3 or 4 a month on my Etsy site.
Right.
Right. So if the Kickstarter wasn't there, these would only exist digitally.
And so these 3, are you looking at, is there any ideas of doing, because you have these 5, you got Little Red Riding Hood, Jack and the Beanstalk, Hansel and Gretel, Goldilocks and Beauty and the Beast. Are these based off of the public domain classic versions of these, or are there any of these kind of Disney-fied facts at all?
Not so much. I definitely don't mention Disney or I mean, the originals there's enough in the originals that Disney has included, so there would definitely be crossover.
Yeah.
But they're definitely based off of like the Grimm fairy tales, more so than and that gets a little bit into the age range for these, because the Grimm fairy tales are actually a lot more gruesome than any of the, the Disney stuff.
Do you have any ideas or any sketches out for any fairly factual fairy tales 2.0? Any more 2.0? Posters in the month? Yeah, any more posters?
I haven't yet. For the fairy tales, I did those 5. I have. I always get, when I start a project, I always get carried away. So I have 16 or 17 infographics in this style. They're not all fairy tales. I did the fairy tales first because it was a good group of 5,
right,
that I could present as a entity. But I have other things, like I do the anatomy of a comic book, and I explain all about like comic book creation.
Okay.
And then I have the U.S. government, and I explain about the 3 branches of government and things like that. Or I do the solar system, and I have one of those, and I talk about all the planets. So the rest of the other 11 or 12 infographic posters I've done, and have yet to do a Kickstarter for, they're a little bit less cohesive as a group. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to approach those. But we'll see how successful this one is. And this was my 24th Kickstarter created. I have 4 in the pipe that are in various stages of working on. So there's lots of, I try to do 2 a year. I do one in February or so, and then I'll do one in July or August for Christmas.
So why is that? Is that something you've kind of studied and figured out that those are the 2 good times, or you just had the most success in like February and October-ish?
Well, I know, backtracking from Christmas, that you kind of have to ship things out. You have to have whatever you're making in hand by November.
Okay.
And then you're going to run the Kickstarter for a month, so you're in October, and then maybe you launch in September. So, you know what I mean? So and then you don't want to, I'm always worried about spamming everybody, like all my friends and Facebook and Twitter and all those. Like, I hate that you don't want to be just constantly like, hey, buy this, buy this, buy this, buy this. So a good 8 months in between projects is a good, to me, and I have no information to back this up at all, but that just feels like a good time frame to be like, okay, I spent $20 in February, I can spend $20 in September or October again.
Right. And so for anybody that's listening or watching this, that you can go to markgonyea.com, and you said there's a link to your Kickstarter right on there. And you did share with us. Now, tell me a little bit about, you mentioned the planets. Is that something that you are Is that a past Kickstarter, or is this something that is going to be a future Kickstarter? Or
No, that actually was a past Kickstarter.
okay.
I did those only as postcards. I have
Oh,
since done larger 12 by 16 version posters for those, which if I'm at a show or something, I bring them to the show. The
right.
Kickstarter was just the 9 or 10 postcard set. And it's kind of based in my style, but with that kind of retro travel poster kind of vibe to them.
Right. I love that. And I love the old travel posters. It has that 1960s minimalist
This
style in there.
project was actually also responsible for me getting one of my favorite design jobs I've ever gotten, which is my current gig that I'm working on, and that's doing all of the artwork for a retro sci-fi game called Mission to Planet Hex.
Oh, wow.
And I'm doing all of it's God. There's probably 160 cards in the game. I'm doing all the artwork for the cards. I'm doing the game box. I'm doing the rule book. All the artwork in this game is going to be from it's all based on Jim Fitzpatrick, which is the creator of the game. He had done, and he's been working on it forever. It's his like labor of love. So he has done his versions of a lot of the artwork, and he wanted me to do my interpretation of it and
Okay.
to upgrade it a bit. And that's been just the best. Like I can't wait to get my hands on a completed game.
And is that something that's going to be a Kickstarter as well?
It will be a Kickstarter. I don't know when he's planning. I think the base game is done, and I'm working on the expansion packs right now. So I think he might be launching, I'm going to guess April or May, and then that's a total guess. And that would be something because I'm not really involved in his Kickstarter, but as the artist, I would definitely promote it. And so, if anybody follows me on Twitter, I post on that kind of stuff on there all the time.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So we're getting towards close to the end of the hour. I told you, man, it flies by.
It flies by.
Yeah. So a lot of your stuff that we've been talking about over these, past this past hour or so, is a lot of that is really focused, a lot of educational focus on it as well. So, with your, your fact posters and your graphics and children's books. So what is part of that is like, do you do any like talks to schools, any like educational aspects
I
of what you
have.
do?
That's always interesting for me because I have absolutely no set presentation of any kind.
Yeah.
So if it's a slightly older class, like a fourth, fifth grade, they could be really ready with questions. I'm all in on like the question and answer kind of meet and greet kind of a thing. And I've been saying for years that I really need to just sit down and create like a good 15 to 20 minute presentation on kids books and design and things like that. It's on the list, one of these days I'll get around to it, I guess. But yeah, I'm completely open to that kind of a thing. It just works better when the kids are bringing their questions to the event kind of a thing.
Right.
Like
So
I wouldn't, like I don't go into a class. I wouldn't go into a first grade class just to read some of the books that I've done.
right.
Like that doesn't. I wouldn't be good at that.
Was that ever part of like your publishing contract of having to actually do book readings or book signings or any of that?
No, no, it wasn't. It wasn't ever. And that was just something kind of they leave up to the creator, they leave up to the artist and writer, and obviously it's beneficial.
Right.
I've never found it to be hugely beneficial in the sense of sales. I mean,
Right.
it's a lot of goodwill, and it is fun most of the time to do that kind of a thing. I've always I have this vision of like all the kids going home and the parents going, "So what'd you do in school today?" And they would go, I don't know, some guy came in and talked about books, Mike something, I think. Like, gave it a shot.
But it's, looking at, looking at your website and looking at all the stuff that you do, there is a huge educational component to it. It's almost like you want to just share knowledge, but in a different format.
I really, and this is where I'll geek out about design for a second. And I really like graphic design, and I love the idea of the relationship of one thing to another thing. And there's so much bad design in the world, like just awful graphic design in the world, that I hope that I can make it a little bit better. Like if somebody has just and that's for graphic design, just the smallest bit of knowledge about design goes a huge way. That takes you 75% of the way. And then the rest of the way is just your own aesthetic preferences. But if you just know proportion and scale and color and, choosing the correct font maybe, or not choosing too many different things at the same time, that's huge. And that goes a long way to making competent design.
So what would be, what are some good references for folks who are want to learn more about graphic design? As you said, it's people can get lost big time in looking at, as you say, what's the best font to complement a design on something. What's some good references or resources that people can go to if they want to learn more about graphic design?
Right. I mean, online is always, just if you punch in elements of graphic design, 1,000 websites will pop up, kind of a thing. I've always told people, find that thing that you like, find that book or artist that you like, and it's fine to copy them. I mean, don't rip them off, but get inspired by them. Like, I love Saul Bass. I could be accused of ripping off Saul Bass because I do very similar things because he's been such an inspiration to my work. You only improve from doing. So do your own birthday invitations, do your own flyers for community garage sales, do your own posters for just the movies and TV that you love. And that's one of the projects that I do. I do a movie I do my own poster for every movie I see in theaters every year. And I don't get paid for that. I don't do anything with it. It's just something that I do to further my skills, and something, I give myself a couple hours to do the best poster I can in that time. And that's just, you only improve by staying on top of your skill, staying on top of your craft and doing it. And then we'll bring this all the way around to my first design book. That happened because it was done. It happened because I finished it and I had something I could send to an agent and a publisher. Way too many people just don't. They talk about it and they just never do it. And it really is that simple. It really is. It could be terrible, but if it's done, you're 90% ahead of everybody else. So you just have to finish.
There was, I remember one comic book artist that I follow would say, it's impossible to be bad at something that you do every day. No, it's impossible to get worse at something you do every day.
That's great. I like that. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think I might have missed my original calling, which would have been a movie editor, because I'll sit there and watch movies and I'm like, oh boy, I don't know. That scene went on 2 seconds too long. I don't know. I might have cut that by a second and a half. And that's all storytelling to me. That's all. And I do that in the posters too. I can do I think, okay, how do you, especially on a story poster where you have all of the panels, everyone's looking at that at the same time. How do you pace that? How do you say, okay, well, this part of the story needs to slow down, so there's more panels telling that part of the story, and it stretches it out.
Right.
And whereas the panels where the action needs to speed up, you're jumping further in each panel, kind of thing. And that all fascinates me.
Right. I mean, so your advice to people who are watching or listening this is, just do it.
Just get the program. Just find an artist. I mean, literally, there's a million graphic artists online. Like, find that aesthetic that you like. Go on to Pinterest or go on to Instagram and keep that inspiration file handy. You know, that's what all these books are. Right. It's all people I admire, and you know, they'll take inspiration from them.
Yeah. Well, so to wrap it up, you have your Kickstarter, which these gorgeous fairy tale posters. It's a bargain to do the $60 one, to get all 5 for $60. And
I
plus,
agree.
as you said, you get the PDFs, the high res PDFs with that as well. Yep. And it's for me, I think I learned a lot more about what it means to be a graphic designer, and some of the ideas about what it means to, make a really good children's book as well. So thank you, Mark. I think this has been, you're about to say something.
Wait, I also broke out a couple other things. Just one other thing. This is Henri Toulet, I think I'm sure I'm butchering his name, but this was a book that came out a couple years ago called Press Here. And this is the book. This is the one book where I'm like, damn, that should have been my idea. It's a brilliant book. It's not mine, but it's awesome. It's it's easily in my top 5 children's books of all time. Yeah.
Really? Okay. Yeah. All right. Good. Like you said, that style that you have, that minimalist but beautifully, there's so much story told in circles and triangles. It's amazing to see that. So
I have this other idea for a blog where I take movie screens and just break it down into triangles, squares, and circles.
Okay.
And just taking out the cinema. Now that's another thing on the list someday.
Yeah.
I have a very long list.
So what we can do, and next time you do a Kickstarter, we'll just get back on and we'll talk more about it. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mark. This has been a great hour of conversation. And I saw that we had a lot of people that were watching it as we're going along.
Oh, great.
So, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks. Awesome.
All right. Now, what was it? The perfection is the enemy of...
Perfection is the enemy of good, or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.